Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're going to preview the NFC North, taking a closer look at the Green Bay Packers with guests who follow the franchise. We do a quick dive into the Green Bay roster, hear thoughts on the Detroit Lions from a division rival, and discuss projected NFC North standings. Information that will help you fully prepare for the 2023 NFL season. We have a special treat in this show as I spoke with two different reporters out of Green Bay. We have both interviews in this episode.
Hey everyone, this is Lomas Brown, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined today by Lauren Helmbrecht, sports reporter for the CBS affiliate WFRV TV out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. You can find her work at wearegreenbay.com. Lauren has also worked at NFL Films and pitched story ideas for HBO's Hard Knocks. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's talk about last season for just a moment. The Packers were up and down last year. You know, they looked out of it, but then they did what Lions fans hate. They make that late season run, but of course that last home game finale against the Lions did not go the Packers' way. So what was the feeling at the end of last year from Packers fans about the season?
I'd say the feeling was disappointment in a sense that it was another year of not making the Super Bowl, because any year you have Aaron Rodgers on your roster and you're a Packers fan, you think you're going to make the Super Bowl. And I'd say maybe not the flashiest roster. The Packers defense last year was what was supposed to carry the team, and they'd be the first to admit they underperformed last year in many different places. But what I really remember from last season is Aaron Rodgers wrapping his arm around Randall Cobb as they slowly walked off the field through the tunnel. And there was a lot of speculation about what that meant and what that was going to look like. And now, a couple months later, well, we know that they're both in New York. So obviously that was the end of a chapter. And I think with the way things were going, Jordan Love having sat behind Rodgers for a couple years, and Rodgers, obviously his offseason going on the darkness retreat, it felt like something needed to change. And now the Packers mindset is, all right, we made the change. It looks a lot different and a lot younger here. So now what are we going to do about it?
All right, so wrapping up last year, we fast forward to this year. There's been some obvious key losses. The two ones that come to mind are Aaron Rodgers and Allen Lazard. You could put Randall Cobb into that category as well. Are there any key losses you felt that the team had from last year?
Well, Mason Crosby not coming back is a big just change of the landscape. I mean, having a new kicker who has to deal with Lambeau is a whole beast in its own right. And I see Mason Crosby stuff on social media. He's still actively posting. He's still working out. So I think if it were up to him, he would love to be on an NFL roster. The Packers brought in Anders Carlson from Auburn, who had a pretty average and up and down time in college. And so far during the preseason, we've seen similar things. Head coach Matt LaFleur and special teams coordinator Rich Bisaccia will say we have to be patient with Carlson. We were patient with Crosby in the past. That's just what it takes to be a kicker. So I'm thinking of the Packers game versus the Seahawks, their final preseason game, and Anders Carlson kicks a 57-yard field goal. I mean, that's in Lambeau. When there's wind, you couldn't tell which way the wind was even blowing. So there was kind of a joke that maybe he's just a stadium kicker. And hey, if he's a stadium kicker, the Packers will take it. But I would say this offseason, during training camp, during mini camp, trying to figure out what is Anders Carlson, what does he bring to this team when Mason Crosby isn't kicking for the Packers anymore.
So you lost some players, but any key additions via free agency this offseason?
Not really. The Packers didn't really buy during free agency at all. I would say that was actually a point of, hey, are they going to add a veteran wide receiver to this room? Hey, are they going to add a veteran tight end? Maybe Jonathan Owens, I would say. Jonathan Owens coming from the Houston Texans. He famously is married to Simone Biles, the greatest gymnast of all time. So, but Owens, in his own right, is obviously a phenomenal athlete if he's on an NFL roster. So I'd say that was probably the flashiest. Honestly, speaking about free agency, the biggest story this offseason was the Packers not adding a veteran tight end, a veteran wide receiver. So that's honestly even more of the story than who they brought in, is the fact that they didn't.
All right. Well, then let's turn our attention to the draft, because you guys took outside linebacker Lucas Van Ness in the first round. You grabbed Luke Musgrave, the tight end, in the second, as well as Jaden Reed, the wide receiver. He played at Western Michigan and Michigan State, so a lot of people over here are familiar with him. Another tight end in the third round. Did any of those picks jump out at you like the day they were made, or any of the later round picks even move the needle for the Packer fan base?
I'd say a big thing was taking defense again to start. That has become a trend for Brian Gutekunst to pick defense in the first round. And one thing that jumped off the page for people just looking at pure stats is Lucas Van Ness did not start at Iowa, but Iowa's defensive rotation was that which they switched a lot of people out. It was a lot based on seniority. So it didn't necessarily impact the number of snaps he was actually playing, but just looking on the page and seeing the Packers took a non-starter from Iowa in the first round, maybe that had a couple people a little confused. And he's taken a lot of lessons from Rashawn Gary, he's told us, and same with Preston Smith and Kenny Clark, just those veterans in the defensive room. Van Ness has said he's learned a lot from them. And then I'd say the tight ends was another one that jumped out to me. Marcedes Lewis no longer on the Packers, and then Robert Tonyan popped over to a fellow NFC North team in the Chicago Bears. So the Packers needed some more tight ends, just factually. And so they took Luke Musgrave coming out of Oregon State, and he is looking really good. He has a lot of speed for his size, and the Packers have tried to utilize that. You'd see in a lot of the preseason games, he's getting a lot of targets as well. So he's not just a blocking tight end. He will definitely be involved in the offense. I'd say the tight ends just trying to figure out, hey, are Kraft and Musgrave up for, are they ready to fill these shoes? Are they up for the opportunity? Are they going to be factors in this offense? And so far, I would say yes, they will be factors in this offense, especially Musgrave. Then Jaden Reed, like you mentioned, adds a lot to the Packers as a wide receiver. He's very, very fast, but
yes,
he's told us in the locker room he wants to be one of the first to say, I'm not just speed. I add a lot to the team. I can do a lot of things. I don't want to just be known as someone who's fast. And he and Keyshawn Nixon have kind of gone back and forth a little bit about who's going to be the kick returners, which is good. I'd rather have a kick returning competition if I were a Packer fan to see, especially knowing how kick returning went last year. So those top four, those top couple draft picks, I personally think they'll play a lot. I think they'll be factors. I would say Van Ness probably will have a bit more time to develop before he's thrust into a really important role immediately, because there is a lot of depth in the defense. But those offensive guys, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing them really quickly.
All right. And you've already touched on some of the observations from the preseason about the tight ends. How have the other receivers looked? I'm talking about Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. Watson had that infamous drop first game of the season, but you saw the last part of the season. It seemed like he really progressed quite a bit. So how have those guys looked on the rest of the wide receiving room?
So Watson and Doubs have an added responsibility as second-year guys, being also the most veteran wide receivers in the room. So that takes a lot of maturing really quickly to be going from brand new rookies, just learning what the NFL is, to having to show the ropes to people. And I'd say they've taken that new responsibility with stride. All the new rookies and even the undrafted guys have said positive things about Watson and Doubs, about what they've been able to contribute. Doubs didn't play in the Packers' most recent preseason game against the Seahawks. He's dealing with an injury. I don't know how severe that is, but in his place, to the surprise of a lot of people, Malik Heath, the undrafted free agent out of Ole Miss, was taking reps with the ones against the Seahawks. And to have an undrafted guy make that much of an impact that quickly, that in the final preseason game, he's taking reps alongside Christian Watson, going with Jordan Love with the ones, I find that very interesting. I think that's exciting too, because, a diamond in a rough kind of situation. And he was speaking with us after the game, talking about hey, I'm playing for a spot in the 53. And he's a funny guy. He was kind of smiling, saying, you know, I'm playing for money. There's a lot of money difference between being a P squad guy versus being a part of the 53. I'm playing for money. And as an undrafted guy, he knows firsthand what that's going to look like. Christian Watson, I think, is up for the challenge. He still has that speed. Everyone who's watched the Packers knows how fast he is. Last year, Aaron Rodgers purposely kept going back to him because you don't want to destroy someone's confidence as a rookie. It's not going back to him. And so this year, you know, it's definitely Dobbs, Watson, 1-2, and then there's Reed, there's Heath, and I think it's exciting. They're building connection with Love. That's really what matters right now, is how do they feel with Love as their quarterback.
All right. And you mentioned the name finally. I'm kind of burying the lead, you know, the one player that everybody wants to know about, but it transitions so well from the tight ends to the wide receiving group and those draft picks. But it's Jordan Love. You know, we've seen him in parts of games, we've seen him play sporadically, but we haven't seen a whole lot of Jordan Love. I haven't watched a lot of his preseason stuff. You've seen his preseason games. You've been at the training camps. How has Jordan Love looked?
Matthew, I'm disappointed to know that you're not tuning in to Packers preseason, Packers training camp. That's so disappointing. Meanwhile, we're on the sidelines sweating or getting rained on. So come on now. Well, I'm happy to give my insights. I'd say Jordan Love looks good. I think there needs to be a tempered expectation amongst Packers fans and amongst the NFL as a whole that did the Packers do it again? Did they have 3 straight future Hall of Famers in a row? And
Let's hope not.
Yeah, as a Lions fan, I can assume that you would hope not. Most people in the NFL would probably hope not because they don't want to keep seeing that. But for the Packers fans and just in general, you got to let the guy play. You got to let him play and just see what happens. That's been a message amongst the front office staff. We just need to see Jordan get reps. And that's ultimately what one of the many factors that led to Rodgers' departure and Love taking over is, look, at this point, he just needs to get reps. We don't know what we have if he's not playing. That was the Packers' philosophy this preseason too. Jordan Love had at least 2, if not 3 series in every preseason game. He was able to score touchdowns to his number 1s and number 2 receivers. So he was able to get the actual in-game practice. He needs to go up against NFL caliber safeties that aren't his own team, that know exactly what he's planning on doing. And so what will that look like? In-game reps. The season's going to start. He's going to play against other teams, and then we can assess what Jordan Love looks like. I don't even think you can assess after 3 games. I think it needs to be half a season to really see what it's going to look like. I think for a Lions fan, you know, when the Packers play the Lions, that'll be a good opportunity to see what Jordan Love really looks like. And then especially by the time they play a second time toward the end of the season. To me, that's when I would really think, all right, who is this Jordan Love guy? What do we have here as an NFC North rival? Who do we have here? What do we have? Wait until the second game to really be able to know that. The first game, it's still going to be so early in the season.
Well, that second game will be Thanksgiving Day, so that's going to be a very highly watched game across the country.
As someone who covers the team, as someone who's seen a big changeover from in the offense specifically, can't believe that it's just immediately going to click. There needs to be time to develop in real in-game situations.
All right, well, then let's compare what you expect of the team this year compared to last year. The defense was supposed to carry last year. You said they didn't live up to it, but they did have the best defense in the NFC North. Not saying much considering the way the Lions, Vikings, and Bears played defense. The Lions improved a lot the second half, but they were still, those 3 teams were in the bottom 4. Offensively, the Packers were middle of the NFL. They were 3rd in the NFC. In what ways are they just as good as last year or better?
So this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I'm still going to give it. The Packers defense is better with a better mindset this year. Last year, I would say they were dominating training camp. They looked so good during the preseason. The ones were just looking awesome. Then they did not live up to expectation. And talking about the end of last season, those defenders, those star players were bummed. They did not live up to expectation. They know they did not do well. And so I think there's been a really concerted effort this year to say, we are not doing that again. we have the same level of talent. There was not a lot of turnover on the defense besides in the safety room. They have the same level of talent. They have the same confidence. They have the same guys, but now they're not going to walk in thinking they're too big for their britches and then get stomped on. So I'd say their mindset is better, being that they have a lot of the same level of talent. Besides that, I mean, switching over to the other positions and to offense or special teams, that's where the young guys come in. That's where it's all of that unknown. So I would say Luke Musgrave adds something to the tight end room that the Packers have not had recently, especially after Robert Tonyan was injured and came back from his injury. He just never really looked the exact same as he was able to before, which obviously makes sense. You tear your ACL, it's hard to come back at that exact same level. Musgrave adds a certain amount of speed that the Packers have not got to play with the tight end before. So maybe in that capacity, that's better. Maybe I can confidently say that without Amari Rodgers returning kicks to start the season, the Packers kick return will for sure be better this year than last year. There were a couple games where Rodgers did not play well, and the Packers obviously ultimately did not keep him on the team. So Keyshawn Nixon and Jaden Reed and Samori Toure I can confidently say that will be better this year than last year.
All right, that sounds great. Now, obviously, we talked about a lot of newer players, the younger receivers, the new quarterback. What areas, because you talked about how you're going to expect to see growth throughout the season. What areas of the team are you most concerned about going into this season?
I would say the safety room. I haven't really been able to figure out who is going to be lining up against Darnell Savage. I think right now Rudy Ford may have won that position, but with Adrian Amos leaving and going to the Jets, the safety room is just veteran and less established. The Packers offensive line have a lot of individually talented players who can be moved around to a lot of different positions. It's a positive because a lot of players can play different positions, but you could also say it's a negative because players aren't getting the one reps in their preferred position all the time, and not feel like at any moment I would need to move over to guard or be a center or be a tackle and just kind of move around. I'd want to be able to focus and lock in on the position that I have trained for.
So let's change the viewpoint a little bit and talk about the Detroit Lions. You've covered the NFC North for a while following the Packers, so you know what's going on with the Lions. How are you and how do you think the Green Bay fan base are viewing the Detroit Lions as we get ready for the 2023 season?
So I think the Packers are remembering how well the Lions performed last year. And I'd say the expression is not just the same Lions. That's the name of that's the name of your podcast. I think that's true. I think the NFC North looks so different from the years that the Packers just dominated from day one. You knew the Packers were going to win the NFC North. And I'd say last season with the Lions, they beat the Packers twice last year, correct?
Yes, they did.
I was at both games. I'm trying to remember, but I know that they did. I mean, that's a huge change of history and recent history of feeling like, oh, the Packers are a lock against Lions. That's not the case anymore. And Packers fans know that. I'd say Packers team knows that. You don't walk into Detroit anymore and just think this is an automatic W. Now, obviously, Detroit had some issues off the field this year with some of the betting scandals, as you know. Obviously, I don't think that's going to impact the team that much besides Williams not going to be playing, or I don't really know how much he's going to be playing. So
he's out the first 6 games, so he won't be there the first time the two teams play.
Yeah, so that'll obviously come to play, but I think the Packers remember Week 17. They remember knowing that all they needed to do was beat the Lions, and then they'd make the playoffs after losing 5 games in a row and after being down and out for a bit of the season, fighting their way back. All they needed to do was beat the Lions in a game that the Lions weren't even playing for because they were statistically eliminated from the playoffs thanks to the Seattle Seahawks, and the Packers couldn't do it. And so now, a Lions team that handedly kept you out of the playoffs last year, single-handedly maybe changed the course of this Packers franchise, because if Aaron Rodgers would have left if he had led the Packers to a deep postseason run, I can't say that definitively. So the Lions are a threat in the sense that they knocked you out of the playoffs last year. They're a good team. They've gotten better. They've drafted well. And it's not, again, for every time I say the name of your podcast, but it's not the same old Lions. It's not the Packers are automatically going to win the NFC North. That's just not the case anymore.
All right. Well, then it tells me that you guys view the Lions as a legit team, a legit threat. You're not just thinking there's this hype train and it's blown out of proportion. So how good do you think the Green Bay Packers can be in Jordan Love's first season? And, you know, if we went back to Aaron Rodgers' first full season, he was 6-10, I believe, that year. And then things kind of took off from there. Obviously, there's 1,000 different pieces, and that stat probably means absolutely nothing towards how Jordan Love and the Packers are going to do this year. But how good can the Packers be? They finished 8-9 last year. And what's your prediction for the NFC North, where each of the teams finish?
So I think that the Packers are going to be above 500. I will not commit to how much above 500. If it's 9-8, I'm still correct because that's still above 500. But I think they have the capacity to win a lot of these games, especially at the front of their schedule, which conversely is the time where the team needs the most work to build that chemistry because it's still the beginning. But I do think they could be above 500. I think there's so many question marks with the NFC North this year because it's so different from years in the past. I don't really know what Justin Fields looks like, as if he's going to be a huge star, which some people are saying he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And then other people are talking about, well, yeah, but he's going to throw a lot of interceptions. And, you know, if you don't have the ball, that's how you lose your games. So I really don't know. I think the Packers, I don't know. I'm not super confident because I feel like there's so many wild cards. And even the Vikings have been really good, but can they keep that up? We're talking about hype train. I mean, are the Vikings? So Matt, I don't know. Can I hear what you think first and then see if I can come back at that?
My take is kind of interesting. I'm predicting the Lions to win the NFC North, which should not be a shock or a surprise. Based on the information we've seen out there, I do believe they are the most talented team. They have the most consistency and cohesion from the last 3 years of all these franchises. As far as Minnesota, Chicago, and Green Bay, I am going to say those three teams will finish about 2 games apart from each other. I do think Chicago will be the most improved team in the division this year. And when you only win, 3 games the previous season, it's easy to be the most improved. But I think they'll be the most improved. I think Minnesota will regress the most this year. I think the Lions will move up a little bit. And I think the Packers are going to stay right about where they were last year, which was at 8-9. So I would put, though, that would be my take on the division. Okay.
So I think I agree with you about the Lions and their consistent trend upward. I think, all right, I'm going to go Lions, Packers, and saying the Packers at number 2 means deep down, I probably think they're going to win more than 9 games, but I'm still not committing to that. I'm still just committing to over 500. So say Lions, Packers, and then Vikings and Bears. And I agree with you that the Packers, Vikings, and Bears are going to be really close to each other. That's why I feel so non-committal, is because I do think, I agree. I think there could be 3 or 4 games that differentiate this, and week 17 could end up being really important. I mean, obviously the Lions and the Packers last season. I mean, when you don't have a clear-cut team that's going to win 80% of their games, then you don't have a team that's going to lose 80% of their games, it gets really crowded right there.
All right. Lauren, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate this insight. It's been awesome having you on here. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you so much. I enjoy talking about the team. I am looking forward to something that Packers fans have waited 3 years to see. What is Jordan Love as a quarterback? What does this team look like without Aaron Rodgers? There's a lot of excitement around that, and the NFC North will get front row seats for that. The Lions will get front row seats coming up very soon, and it's just a different era in Green Bay, which therefore means it's a different era in the NFC North.
Folks, remember, you can catch Lauren Helmbrook's work at wearegreenbay.com. Lions fans, if you're listening and you want to scout the Packers throughout the season, check that out. And now for the next interview. I'm joined today by John Miller, sports reporter for NBC 26 out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. John, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited. NFC North. It's kind of up for grabs this year, so I'm super pumped to talk NFC North football with you.
It is a very different looking division than last year for sure. Let's just touch on the Packers last year for a minute. What was the feeling at the end of last year from Packers fans about the season?
Well, let me just tell you, first of all, I was on the sidelines when the Lions beat the Packers after the game, and the Lions contingent of fans that were there were, saying, go Lions, go. Is probably one of the cooler experience I've ever been a part of, because you guys have had a fan base that has suffered for a long time. It was just a kind of a cool moment to see that, even though I cover the Packers. It was a really cool experience to cover that with the Lions. But yeah, I think the Packers in the second half of the season, their defense improved, and so did the whole team, but they played a really weak schedule. So I think it was a little bit of a mirage. And then the Lions, they didn't have anything to really play for in that game, so they had nothing to lose. You saw Dan Campbell bring out all the stops. I mean, they were doing everything they could. So it was a fun game, and I think the Packers just didn't deserve to make the playoffs last year, to be honest. I mean, they played a weak schedule. They didn't beat up on good teams, then they beat up on the bad ones, and Lions came in and smacked them in the mouth at home.
Well, as we transition away from last year, let's look at this upcoming season. The obvious loss, the key loss, is Aaron Rodgers leaving. Allen Lazard, top receiver, left. Randall Cobb left as well. Were there any other key losses from the Packers team?
I think the biggest loss of the offseason for the Packers, besides Aaron Rodgers, has to be Marcedes Lewis. He was so good at blocking that nobody really noticed it, because he just always did his job. He created a bunch of running lanes, and he was good in the red zone as well once in a while, but he was such a good blocker. And the replacements, rookie tight ends, take time to develop. You guys know TJ Hawkinson, took him a couple of years. Now he's on the Vikings, but that's a huge loss for the Packers. And maybe Luke Musgrave can be really good, and he looks the part so far, but you can't replace that kind of blocking, especially in an offense that likes to run.
Let's look to the draft, because I know you guys are expecting some contributions there. Did any of those picks jump out at you?
Jaden Reed is going to be a dog. He catches everything. His athleticism. The Packers drafted Amari Rodgers out of Clemson a couple of years ago, and they thought he was going to be that nice slot, take over for Randall Cobb, make big plays, do the jet sweep. When you see Jaden Reed do it, it looks totally different, and he makes acrobatic catches. I mean, he's really impressed so far in the offseason. And getting a little deeper into draft picks, Carl Brooks, defensive tackle out of Bowling Green. I mean, he led that team in sacks every single year. He was there for 5 years. I mean, 1 year was COVID shortened, but he still did. He led the team in sacks. He's been getting a lot of pressures. Lucas Van Ness so far has kind of been, he looks a little rough around the edges. You can see he looks like the Hulk out there for size. The Packers have kind of used him at edge in the preseason, but in the Seahawks game, the last game of the preseason, they kind of moved him inside, like, Iowa did. He played inside and out. They moved him inside to play that 3-4 end, the end on the 3 on the line. And he looked a little better. He was getting some pressure, but I think it's going to take a while for him to make an impact. So I think Musgrave, Jaden Reed, Carl Brooks, or even Colby Wooden out of Auburn, defensive tackle, those guys I think are going to make the biggest impact for the Packers.
All right, well then let's move through training camp. It's wrapped up. How has Jordan Love looked?
Man, if you would have asked me last offseason, it would have been a totally different answer. So the Packers bringing in Tom Clements for Aaron Rodgers' final year, their quarterbacks coach, has done wonders for his footwork. Jordan Love looks like a completely different quarterback. He looks confident. He can make every throw, but the one throw that he's having a little trouble with, which is surprising because he has a cannon for an arm, is the deep ball. He's struggling with the deep ball. He just can't seem to connect with Christian Watson. In the Seattle preseason game, he had him deep. Watson probably could have burned the defensive backs by 10, 15 yards, easy touchdown. Instead, Love throws it up, hangs in the air. Watson has to stop, jump up, try to grab it. And it's a play that I think eventually they hit, but they haven't been able to hit it so far. And Christian Watson continues to show out. But yeah, Jordan Love, I don't know if he'll be Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre, but he can make every throw. He's got nice zip on the ball. He can rush. He'll be a top 15 quarterback at the end of the year. I don't know where he starts, but at the end, he'll be a top 15 quarterback. He just needs to run that offense, which I don't think Aaron Rodgers did last year. I think Rodgers was running a little bit of Rodgers offense mixed with maybe a little bit of what Matt LaFleur wanted. I think the Packers just need a guy who comes in there and can make good throws and hand the ball off.
Where do you think the Packers will be as good as last year or maybe even better?
Well, I think they'll be a little better in the passing game, to be honest. I think, Christian Watson's another year older. This is nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers. It's the Watson's a year older, Dobbs a year older. I mean, those guys were rookie last year. Reed can come in and make an impact. So I think the passing game could be a little better. I mean, even Rodgers struggled with the deep ball last year. I think he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire NFL, if not he was at like Zach Wilson level of deep ball throws last year, I'm pretty sure. I mean, the stats have back it up, but I think, if they just hit on that and the guys are a little older. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I always hesitate to say they're going to be better. Sure, I think they have 8 or 9 first-round picks over the last few years on that defense, but it's still led by Joe Barry, and Joe Barry has never led a defense and made them be in the I think Lions fans know about Joe Barry. So,
we remember Joe Barry, and yes, we do remember him from a while back.
It's just, I'm really skeptical of Joe Barry's defense. I mean, the whole training camp, they've talked about being more aggressive. They're going to attack. They're going to let Jair kind of go do his thing this year, as we saw Justin Jefferson when Jair didn't get to cover him in that first game of the year, just absolutely torched the Packers. I think they talk about how they're going to do things differently. I got to see it. I think they have all the talent in the world up front, the linebackers. I mean, Quay Walker, I think, takes a huge step, but they got to show me before I say the defense is any better. And they're going to need them big time early on in the year, as the offense, I still think, will need some time to get that cohesion.
Your expectation seems to be they're going to be a team above 500. That's become the expectation for decades now.
Yeah, I think, to me, anybody asks, I think they have the potential to be 7-10 or 10-7. I think it's in that window, just one-score games. Maybe we know all the Vikings were 13-0 in one-score games last year. I think the Packers were really good the year before, or in LaFleur's first year. I mean, fluky stuff happens in the NFL, so the Packers can just get things going at the right time, which they never seem to get one side of the ball going when the other is going really well. Like we saw in the Lions game last year, the defense played well, but the offense couldn't do anything. If they just play both average, I think they could be average and maybe sneak into the playoffs as a wild card, or as we said before, the North is up for grabs. I think anybody can win it. Even if the Bears it just takes one team getting hot, even though I don't think the Bears will make the playoffs, but you know what I mean?
I do. And actually, in just a minute, we're going to get to that prediction process, and I'm going to actually put you on record here. But
Okay.
Before we get to that, how are you and the Green Bay Packer fan base viewing the Detroit Lions this year?
Man, I don't think anybody's underestimating the Lions, and I don't think they did last year. But I think everybody wants to see them prove it. They may have beat the Packers to end the season, but they still didn't make the playoffs. So I think everybody wants to see it. Jared Goff is still the quarterback, even though Ben Johnson could have been a head coach probably anywhere last year or in the offseason, and he chose to come back. And I think that was huge for Goff. But also the Lions were not great away from Ford Field last year. So I think people still, it's a prove it mentality with the Packers fans, and, kind of like the Vikings. It's like, prove it. You guys won so many one-score games last year. Let's see what happens. And I think it's going to come down, whoever plays the best in the division, doesn't matter what happens non-conference. That's probably who makes the playoffs.
And that's very fair.
I would run through a wall for Dan Campbell, man. Just watching him, he made me want to do knuckle push-ups. I want to have a hurt wrist last year. He's still doing knuckle push-ups. My kind of guy.
That's awesome to hear. I know he's won me over and a lot of others as well. I actually dressed up as him for Halloween last year, and that game was the game the day after that was against the Packers at Ford Field, and I went to the game dressed as him and was able to yell to him from the sideline area and got him to laugh and wave back. It was pretty good.
I think something else he laughed at was probably Aaron Rodgers severely underthrowing David Bakhtiari when Bakhtiari was eligible to catch a pass. I mean, that was one of the worst passes I think I've ever seen Aaron Rodgers throw. So
was that the Aiden Hutchinson interception?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think even Rodgers said that Bakhtiari will never forgive him for it, or he'll always make fun of him for it, because those guys are boys.
So yeah, it's going to be an exciting NFC North season. So let's look at that. First part of the question is, how good can the Packers be? You've already kind of mentioned that. And then I kind of want to hear, what's your NFC North prediction? There's 4 teams. What do you got?
All right, let's start with the predictions first. I'll probably say Bears will be last, just because I'm not a big believer in Justin Fields. Fantasy stats are different than what you do on the field. I think a lot of people confuse that with running quarterbacks. You got to see a lot more there. So I'll probably say the Bears will be last. I mean, their offensive line is still really bad. This is where it gets tough. I want to say, I think Sorry, this one's tough for me.
No, it's a very tough question. I mean, my answer is kind of cheating a little bit, and I can tell you mine after if you want to hear it, but it's tough.
I'd love to hear it. Oh man, I just think, the Vikings won it last year. I know they won a lot of one-score games, but I think with Jordan Addison added and you swap him with Thielen, more KJ Osborne, I know their defense is going to be much worse this year, but honestly, their defense was really old last year, so they got younger, so then maybe they'll be faster, and Brian Flores is there. So I think the Vikings should be the favorites to win it until they show that they can't. And then I think 2 and 3 is a toss-up between the Packers and the Lions. I'm going to say, this is a tough one. I think the Packers hop up to 2, just because I think they're more of a complete team than the Lions. And it just all depends on Jordan Love and Joe Barry. But I think LaFleur is designing some great concepts that Love's been hitting and what even Sean Clifford's been hitting in the preseason. Guys are schemed open, and you saw it last year. Rodgers was just not hitting them. So I think if Love plays within the offense, they should maybe sneak into the playoffs as a wild card. Even the Lions could. But yeah, I think the Lions still just got to prove it a little bit.
Is that what's keeping you from putting the Lions at the top, is saying you haven't seen it, they didn't make the playoffs, so you don't want to give them that promotion or that ascension before they've earned it?
Yeah, that one is, especially, and their defense was still really, really bad last year. I mean, it was still one of the worst defenses in the league. And until they show that their defense is better, I can't move them ahead of the Packers. I know Aaron Glenn's done a great job there. They love him there, but you haven't seen it. I mean, you hope Aiden Hutchinson can take that next step. And then they got some playmakers there, but for some reason, they just can't seem, that defense is not where they want it to be.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you some credit for being the first person I've spoken with that has not predicted the Lions to win the division.
Yeah.
And so, and just because it's a Lions podcast doesn't mean you have to predict the Lions to win the division, Yeah, so I give you some credit.
2 and 3 is a toss-up between the Packers and the Lions. I think either of them could do it. I think either of them can win the division. But the Vikings, until, they prove they can't, or, they're the incumbent. My family who are Vikings fans, I'm not. Probably would like to hear that, but it's just the non-biased picking me would just say it's got to be the Vikings. But I do love that addition of David Montgomery for the Lions. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's going to be big. I'm on the hype train. I definitely the progress we saw throughout the season. When you go 8-2 to finish the season like that, and you left a couple games out there, a couple plays on the field, and the fact is, if I look at the division, I think 2 teams improved and 2 did not. I think the Bears improved the most this offseason.
Right.
I also put the Lions in the category of improving. Looking at their roster changes, I don't feel like the Lions got worse anywhere.
Right.
They may have stayed status quo at some spots, but I didn't see them getting worse. The Packers and the Vikings. I think the Vikings are going to regress the most. You already talked about it. We saw some big losses on defense. I don't think you can underrate the value of Dalvin Cook. I know they drafted somebody and they'll put them with Alexander Madison, but I do think the Vikings regressed the most, and part of that was their salary cap situation. They were stuck. Yep. And I think the Packers might regress a little bit or kind of stay status quo. The real big question mark is Jordan Love. But like you pointed out, Aaron Rodgers and his deep ball was not what you've seen in previous years. So I don't really know what to expect. So I'm putting the Lions in first. And then I'm honestly thinking the other 3 teams are going to be separated by about 2 games. And I think it's going to be a real close second place battle. But anything can happen. And just because I'm saying I think the Lions will win doesn't mean they're going to. Any team can win any game. Chicago beat San Francisco to open the season last year.
Right. Yeah. Well, Trey Lance was the starting quarterback as well. Now they already gave up on him. Yeah, it's anybody's ball game. I think the Lions are a very good team. I think the Vikings are a good team, good coach. I think there's a lot of great head coaches in the NFC North, but it'll be interesting to see if the Lions can go out there and prove it.
That it will be. John, before we get out of here, any last comments or thoughts? I really appreciate having you on the show today.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, the Packers are really young, and I think what people should know about the Packers is they look crazy athletic, probably the most athletic I've ever seen the Packers. And also they seem to be having the most fun I think I've ever seen a team have in training camp so far. They just seem like LaFleur said it after the Seahawks game. The players keep saying it throughout camp. they're out there having fun, and they all seem to be really, really close. And, it's just, there were some older guys last year and some veterans. I think that, it's tough to connect when you're 10, 18 years older than some of these guys. And I think this team's close, and I think they all have Jordan Love's back. Every single comment you hear, they're ready to go to war with them.
Folks, you can catch John Miller on NBC 26 out of Green Bay. So if you're a Lions fan and you just want to scout the Packers, go check his work out there. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast to get alerts about the new episodes. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button. Subscribe as well while you're at it. Please tell your friends about the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Soltesiak. Find all the episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.